All right, let's jump right in. We're going to connect two things that you probably never, ever put in the same sentence: the humble cow burp and a revolutionary, super high tech climate solution that works on a microscopic level. Yeah, you heard that right. So, when you picture what's causing climate change, what comes to mind? It's usually smokestacks, right? Car exhausts, the usual suspects. But one of the absolute biggest contributors is hiding out in a field somewhere, and it burps. And that leads to a really fascinating thought. I mean, the simple answer seems to be, well, just have fewer cows. But that's a huge problem for nutrition and for economies all over the world. So, what if we came at this from a totally different angle? What if we could re engineer the whole process from the inside out? To really get why this is such a big deal, we need to talk about methane. Now, CO2 gets all the headlines, but methane is the second biggest driver of climate change. And in some ways, it's a much more powerful and maybe even better target for us to tackle. And this number, this just says it all: 86 times. Over a 20-year period, one single molecule of methane is 86 times better at trapping heat than a molecule of CO2. It is an absolute monster. But, and this is a huge but, there's an upside. Methane has a much shorter lifespan in the atmosphere. We're talking like 12 years compared to centuries for CO2. So if we cut methane, we get a much, much faster benefit for the climate. So, where's all this methane coming from? Well, if you look at the human-caused microbial sources, look at that chart. The single biggest slice of that pie is not landfills or rice paddies. Nope. It's ruminant livestock. Cattle, sheep, goats, at a whopping 54%. Okay, so now let's zoom in on just the livestock. You can see that the vast majority of their methane, 85% of it, doesn't come from manure or anything like that. It comes from something called enteric fermentation. It's just a fancy way of saying the digestive process inside the animal's gut. Basically, it's burp. And if we drill down even one more level, one animal really stands out from the herd: cattle. They are responsible for more than 3/4 of all these digestive emissions. Just their sheer numbers and their unique biology make them the #1 target if we want to find a real solution. So, if we know exactly where the problem is, you're probably thinking, why haven't we fixed this already? Well, people have definitely tried, but all the common solutions we've come up with so far have some pretty serious drawbacks. So, solution #1, eat less meat. Reduce the herd. On the surface, it makes sense, but it clashes directly with major global goals, like ending poverty and hunger. For a lot of developing nations, livestock are absolutely critical for both nutrition and for their economy. Okay, what about breeding better cows? Selectively breed animals that just naturally produce less methane. The problem? It is incredibly slow. We're talking maybe a 4 to 8% cut over 20 years. Plus, sometimes there's a trade-off. The lower methane cows might produce less milk, and that's just not productive. And then there's all this buzz about feed additives, especially seaweed. And while some of it shows promise, the effects can be temporary. What's more alarming is that the key ingredient in the most effective seaweed, a compound called bromoform, is a potential carcinogen, and it can deplete the ozone layer. So yeah, we need a better, more permanent solution. And to find that solution, we need to shrink ourselves down and go inside the cow, into this amazing biological engine called the rumen. So here's the basic cycle. A cow eats grass, right? That grass has carbohydrates. Inside its special stomach, the rumen, a whole community of microbes goes to work breaking them down. The cow gets useful energy, but there are some waste products, hydrogen and CO2, that other microbes use to create methane. And then the cow burps it out. So you can think of this rumen as just a giant, high-tech fermentation tank. And the specific workers on this methane assembly line are these ancient single-celled organisms called methanogenic archaea. They're the little specialists whose entire job is just to pump out methane. They are the tiny factories we need to focus on. And this is where the science gets really, really cool, because it turns out these little factories have a sort of hidden switch inside them. They have a choice between two different manufacturing processes. So like we saw, these methanogens grab hydrogen and CO2, and they turn it into methane. But what if we could get them to make something else? Something that's not just harmless, but maybe even useful. Okay, I know this slide looks super complicated, but don't worry about the details. Just look at the two columns. Think of them as two different recipes. The recipe on the right, that's methanogenesis, it makes methane. The one on the left, acetogenesis, uses the exact same ingredients, but it produces something called acetate, which is actually a source of energy for the cow. So why does one recipe get chosen over the other? Well, it all comes down to the final piece of biochemical machinery. The pathway that makes methane has an extra step at the very end, and it's run by a pair of enzymes that scientists just call the MTR-MCR module. You can think of it as the methane finishing station on the assembly line. So if that MTR-MCR module is the key piece of machinery, that gives us a very specific target. And this leads to a seriously cutting-edge idea. What if we could just remove that part of the assembly line? And the tool to do it is CRISPR. You've probably heard of it. It's this amazing gene editing technology that basically works like a biological find and replace for DNA. It lets scientists find a super specific genetic sequence and just snip it out, like molecular scissors. So here's the game plan in 3 steps. Step 1, you target the specific genes that build that methane machine. Step 2, you use CRISPR's molecular scissors to just snip those genes right out of the microbe's DNA. And the result? The microbe's assembly line is permanently rewired. It literally can't make methane anymore, so it defaults to the other pathway, and it only produces that useful acetate for the cow. Now, I know this all sounds like something straight out of science fiction, but this is a very real area of research. So the big question is, what's the road ahead look like? How do we get this from the lab to the farm? The authors of the paper this is all based on really put it best. They suggest that redirecting this tiny process isn't just a fix for cows. It could be a blueprint for tackling microbial methane emissions everywhere, from wetlands to rice paddies. It's a massive, massive idea. Which leaves us with one final, pretty powerful question. We always look for these big, sweeping, grand solutions to our biggest problems. But what if one of the best answers lies in making the tiniest, most precise change to the smallest forms of life on Earth?